Welcome to the Solid Signal podcast for the week of January 18th, 2021. Well, my friends, this may be the last time I mention the CES show on the Solid Signal podcast or at the Solid Signal blog. I, quote unquote, attended the show along with some unknown number of people this year. It was all virtual, and it was a pretty big disappointment, I'll be honest with you there. It was really just an interactive exhibitor directory that gave you no idea what was going on with different groups, along with some panel discussions, which in retrospect were not that bad, and some keynotes, which in retrospect were that bad. The whole experience was, I would say, a major disappointment, considering that this is the Consumer Technology Association. This is the group that if you would think that anybody could do better, that they would. And they didn't. If anything, what they did was create perhaps some nostalgia for the old in-person shows that might benefit them next year as people are anticipated to return to Las Vegas for the show. But I have to wonder also if that's going to create a feeling that that show doesn't need to exist. After all, by the time the CES 22 show comes around, it will have been 2 years since there will have been this kind of expo, and yet the world of consumer technology will have continued to grow. So you have to wonder how many companies are really going to put out the major amount of money and time that are needed to try to get a show like this going. Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm sure that CES as a show will continue until 2025, 2030, or whenever their contract with the city of Las Vegas is up, because it's probably too expensive to get out of it than, to stay in it. But I mean, will the show continue as being a real force? There's been this sort of momentum over the last 5 to 10 years where the show has been coasting on its past glories for a very long time. And when you talk to people who don't go to the show and they ask you what it's all about, they always mention things like big televisions. Well, of course, we all know the big televisions were the hit of the 2006 CES. And that if you want to see a big television and you're the sort of person who's inclined to go out and about these days, all you need to do is go to Costco and you'll see a better display of big televisions than you could see at any Las Vegas show up until about 2010. You can say that this could be a show for the really high-end consumer, but there aren't a whole lot of those because, let's be honest, the mid-range TVs are really, really good now. And it's practically impossible to spend more than $2,000 to get the TV of your dreams, unless your dreams include a TV that's over 100 inches in size. More and more, the CES show has been a way for people to get together behind the scenes and make the kind of deals that need to be made. The folks at Solid Signal have been doing this for a very long time. And I've said in some of the podcasts that I've put out there and some of the blog articles that the real fun of going to CES is going into those closed rooms and seeing the things that you can't even talk about. But after 2 years of doing that without being in person, I have to wonder if that kind of business is kind of over as well. So I tend to say I'm a little bit down on the CES show. I'm a little disappointed by what didn't happen this year. And unlike others, I'm not looking forward to the upcoming shows. It remains to be seen, I have to say, if it's going to be worth it for the team at Solid Signal to send somebody over to Las Vegas in January of 22 to cover the show at all. Because, as I said, in past years, it's been harder and harder to cover it in a way that's been entertaining. And that disappoints me. That makes me sad. I've mentioned the 2006 show before, and that was really the first show for me. First time I went to the CES show, and I was pretty impressed. Back then, it looked pretty different. There were no automotive exhibitors. There were a lot of audio exhibitors, and in past years, that has almost completely dried up. And there was a whole category of really wacky stuff that doesn't really exist anymore. It's gotten so expensive to have a booth at CES that just putting out something that you think is cool is not going to really make good financial sense. In the last 16 years since I have started attending, I've grown more and more jaded with the show, and if you read the CES coverage at the Solid Signal blog, you can see that for sure, no question. In the meantime, time spent in Las Vegas has gotten a lot less fun for a lot of reasons. The biggest problem is the traffic. Traffic in Las Vegas is so totally out of control that there's really nothing at this point that can be done about it. The monorail itself I think they filed for bankruptcy because they really weren't prepared for what happened in 2020. And I guess Elon Musk is building tunnels underneath Las Vegas to try to move people around, but that's only going to scratch the surface. The problem is that this is a city it's impossible to move the sheer number of people from place to place that need to be moved. And, the hopes are that with the new CES hall and the big hotels that are opening up right around there, that you're going to have fewer and fewer people who need to be around Las Vegas. But I really doubt that because the show is going to continue to have enough people, even if it's down to half of its size, that people will need to stay further away from the show floor. And it's also going to be cheaper to do that, so people are going to do it. Traveling anywhere during CES is an incredible chore. You have to allocate 1 hour or more just to go from one place to another. In many cases, it's easier to walk even if the places are distant. As long as you're talking about walking 2 miles or less in any direction, then it's just easier to walk. And let's be honest, you put an awful lot of work onto your feet during CES and you end up paying for it later. And I think for all the talk of Las Vegas being a place that's constantly reinventing itself, we really haven't seen that since the last recession, which means really for the last decade. You're seeing some new hotels, but they're very much special purpose, aimed at foreign travelers or a specific kind of traveler. You're not really seeing the kind of new mass markety stuff that you used to see. And the residencies have been occupied more now by singers from the 1980s instead of singers from the 1960s, but that's not a reinvention. So I'm soured, I guess, on Las Vegas in addition. And the whole place is so built out now that there's no place for anything new to go. Wherever something needs to go, it's usually taking up the place of a parking lot, which makes things worse, to be very honest with you. So overall, the CES experience, I'm just not that hot on it anymore. And perhaps that means it's time to pass that torch to a new generation of Solid Signal bloggers. And I may work for the next year to try to build a team that is going to go there and report on it instead of me. And that would make me very sad, to be honest with you, to see the end of that era. I would rather see CES come back in ways that might excite me, but well, who knows? In order to see that for yourself, in order to learn that, you're going to have to keep reading the Solid Signal blog over the next year and see what happens at CES in 12 months. Plenty of time to think about it and plenty of time to kind of dream and hope, and maybe it's just going to get better. That's, I think, what we want for 2021 in general. That's it for me with the Solid Signal podcast for this week. Have a great week, and if you've got ideas for a future podcast, be sure to leave them in the comments section wherever you listen to this podcast or watch it. And be sure to like and subscribe because, as I've said, that's what keeps my bosses happy with me. Have a great week.